The opulent ballroom, usually a sanctuary of hushed conversations and clinking champagne flutes, erupted into a pandemonium of shrieks and splashes. Water, a dark, muddy torrent, burst through the grand double doors, sweeping across the polished marble floor with a terrifying, unstoppable force. Elegant gowns turned into sodden rags, crystal chandeliers reflected frantic faces, and the air filled with the visceral scent of earth and decay. Guests, moments ago engaged in polite banter, scrambled onto tables and chairs, their perfectly coiffed hair now plastered to their panicked faces. The pristine white linens of the buffet tables sagged under the sudden weight of the invading deluge, sending gourmet appetizers floating like bizarre, edible debris. It was chaos, pure, unadulterated, and sickeningly satisfying. They ignored my warnings. A quiet, resolute voice echoed over the rising din, cutting through the bedlam with a defiant edge. So I made sure they couldn't ignore the water. Months before the deluge, the quiet suburban enclave of Willow Creek, with its meticulously manicured lawns and identical terracotta roofs, was a picture of serene affluence. It was here that Alex Chen, a software engineer with an obsessive eye for detail and a knack for identifying patterns, first noticed it. Not a grand, obvious flood, but subtle, insidious signs. A persistent damp patch on the far corner of their backyard fence that never seemed to dry, even after weeks of sun. A faint, earthy smell lingering in their basement after a heavy spring shower, more pungent than usual. He attributed it to old plumbing at first, maybe a leaky sprinkler system, but then he started seeing small, unusual rivulets of water appearing on the cul-de-sac's usually dry storm drains, even on days with minimal rainfall. His own property, a modest but well-maintained single-family home on the lower side of the development, felt like it was gradually, imperceptibly, sinking into a perpetual dampness. He wasn't a hydrologist, but years of debugging complex code had trained his brain to spot anomalies. This was an anomaly. Alex's first communication with the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, or HOA as it was universally known, was a polite email. He outlined his observations, attaching a few photos of the damp spots and the unusual drainage, concerned about potential long-term moisture issues. He wrote, suggesting a review of the community's drainage infrastructure. The response, a week later, was a boilerplate email from HOA Secretary Brenda Maxwell, thanking him for his diligence and assuring him that regular maintenance is performed and no immediate concerns have been identified. It was the bureaucratic equivalent of a pat on the head and a dismissal, but the dampness persisted. The subtle pooling near the fence grew slightly larger, the earthy smell in the basement more distinct. After another significant rainfall, he noticed standing water in a low-lying common area park, water that lingered for days, attracting mosquitoes. His second approach was a phone call. He spent 20 minutes navigating an automated system before reaching a brusque receptionist who promised to pass on his concerns to the facilities committee. He never received a call back. Undeterred, and now with a growing sense of urgency, Alex attended the next monthly HOA meeting. He sat through tedious discussions about shrub height regulations and the color of mailboxes, clutching a folder filled with new photos, soil moisture readings he'd taken himself with a cheap home kit, and even printouts of historical rainfall data. When his turn came during the resident concern segment, he presented his findings calmly, professionally. He explained the increasing saturation, the potential for erosion, and the possibility of more severe flooding down the line if the underlying issues with the aging drainage system weren't addressed. The committee, led by the impeccably dressed and perpetually tanned HOA president, Richard Sterling, listened with thinly veiled impatience. Sterling, renowned for his golf handicap and dismissive smirk, waved a manicured hand. Mr. Chen, we appreciate your enthusiasm, he drawled, casting a glance at the other committee members who offered polite, unconvincing smiles. However, our engineers assure us the system is up to code. What you're observing is likely just an unusually wet season. Budget constraints. You understand, we can't go chasing every puddle. He even made a subtle joke about alarmists, eliciting a chuckle from a few committee members. Alex felt a cold knot of frustration tighten in his stomach. It wasn't just dismissal, it was condescension. The weeks that followed brought more rain, heavier than Alex had anticipated. The damp patch became a perpetually soggy strip, attracting an alarming number of earthworms. His basement, once merely smelling earthy, now felt distinctly clammy, the concrete floor perpetually cool and slightly slick to the touch. He even spotted faint, watermark-like stains creeping up the lower sections of the drywall in his utility room. He emailed the HOA again, now with a firmer tone, referencing the previous meeting and the worsening conditions. He received a curt reply from Brenda Maxwell stating, "Your concerns have been noted. The HOA maintains a robust schedule of inspections. Any repairs deemed necessary will be addressed in due course." Due course felt like a polite way of saying never. The bureaucratic wall was impenetrable. Each unanswered call, each dismissive email, each condescending smile from the HOA leadership chipped away at Alex's patience, replacing it with a simmering resentment. He wasn't just concerned for his own property anymore. He felt a responsibility for the community, a duty to warn them of a threat the people in charge simply refused to acknowledge. He began to feel utterly alone in his crusade, watching the water rise, knowing that soon, it wouldn't just be his basement feeling the squeeze. The tension was building, not just in the saturated earth beneath Willow Creek, but within Alex himself, a quiet hum of fury beneath his composed exterior. The unusually wet season Richard Sterling had so glibly dismissed transitioned into something far more ominous, a relentless storm, christened Hurricane Amelia by the weather channels, battered Willow Creek for 3 days. When the skies finally cleared, the polite dampness Alex had been tracking had transformed into a distinct crisis. His basement, once merely clammy, now boasted a half-inch of standing water across its entire floor. The utility room's drywall was visibly stained, the paint bubbling and peeling like an old sunburn. More alarmingly, the backyard, usually a neat expanse of green, was a shallow pond, reflecting the bruised sky, and the persistent damp strip by the fence had become a flowing stream, eroding the soil beneath it. It was a minor flood? Yes, but it was his flood, a tangible, slimy testament to the HOA's willful negligence. He documented everything, timestamps, photos of the water line, even a video of water still actively seeping from the ground hours after the rain had stopped. This, he thought, surely this would make them listen. He sent another urgent email to Brenda Maxwell, attaching the fresh evidence. The response came 2 days later, not from Brenda, but from a new generic HOA email address, signed by the Willow Creek Facilities management team. It was brief, curt, and maddeningly bureaucratic. "We regret any inconvenience caused by the recent unprecedented weather event," it read. "Homeowners are reminded that individual property maintenance, including flood prevention measures, falls under their responsibility. The HOA is not liable for damages caused by natural occurrences." They weren't just unresponsive. They were actively shifting blame, using the unprecedented weather as a convenient shield. It was a slap in the face. Alex, however, refused to be silenced. He printed out all his communications, organized his photos, and walked door to door. His immediate neighbors, the Millers, had some dampness in their garage but dismissed it with a shrug. "Just one of those things, Alex," Mrs. Miller said, already looking past him to her prize-winning petunias. "Always happens with a big storm." Down the street, the young couple with 2 kids expressed vague concern but quickly changed the subject to school zones. Others were simply absent or politely brushed him off, clearly uncomfortable getting involved in a dispute with the HOA. He tried the online community forum, posting his findings, detailing his interactions with the HOA, and warning about the drainage issues. His post was met with a few likes and a handful of comments. "Hope it gets better." Or "That sucks, dude." One anonymous comment read, "Be careful, Alex, the HOA doesn't like troublemakers. They can make your life hell." It dawned on him that most residents either didn't care enough, feared repercussions, or simply trusted that the all-powerful HOA had everything under control. He was an island, shouting into a void. His frustration intensified, hardening into a grim resolve. He escalated. He consulted a local environmental consultant, paying out of his own pocket. The consultant, a grizzled man named Frank with mud under his fingernails, visited Alex's property. He confirmed Alex's suspicions. The current drainage system was woefully inadequate for the expanding development and increasingly frequent heavy rains. "This isn't just a wet season, son," Frank rasped, pointing to the waterlogged soil. "This is an engineering problem waiting for a catastrophe." Frank drafted a professional report, complete with hydrological assessments and recommendations for upgrading the system. Alex presented this report to the HOA. Certified mail, return receipt requested. He followed up with phone calls to Sterling's direct line, leaving increasingly terse messages. He even contacted a real estate lawyer, hoping a legal threat might prompt action. The lawyer, after reviewing his case, sighed, "Mr. Chen, while you have a compelling case, suing an HOA is a long, expensive, and often futile battle. They have deep pockets, layers of legal protection, and frankly, they can make living here unbearable for you during the process. Unless there's a major, widespread disaster, judges often side with the established entities on maintenance issues." It was a dead end. Every legitimate avenue, every rational appeal, every attempt to work within the system led to the same brick wall of indifference, bureaucracy, and legal intimidation. Then came the email, the Willow Creek Annual Gala, an evening of elegance and community spirit. It arrived as Alex was staring at the fresh, expanding crack in his basement foundation, a direct result of the persistent moisture. The gala, the HOA's annual celebration of their own perceived excellence, a lavish affair held at the grand Old Willow Creek Country Club, complete with a flowing champagne fountain and a live jazz band. He pictured Richard Sterling, Brenda Maxwell, and the rest of the committee toasting their success while his house slowly crumbled, literally sinking due to their negligence. The irony was a punch to the gut, that crack in the foundation, a physical manifestation of their disregard, was his breaking point. The quiet, analytical engineer inside him snapped. He looked from the crack to the invitation, then out to his still soggy backyard, where the drainage ditch, leading directly to the country club's lower grounds, seemed to wink at him. A dangerous, exhilarating idea began to form. It was a dark, vengeful thought, but one that offered a potent sense of justice. What if he could bring the water directly to them? Not just a nuisance, but a dramatic, undeniable consequence. He grappled with it for days. It was illegal, undoubtedly. It would cause damage, create a massive scene, and almost certainly lead to his expulsion from the community, if not worse. He, Alex Chen, the meticulous, rule-abiding citizen, contemplating a literal act of civil, or rather, uncivil, disobedience. He envisioned the chaos, the ruined finery, the look on Sterling's face. The thought was intoxicating. His logical mind screamed caution, listing every conceivable negative outcome. But his emotional core, raw from months of being ignored, dismissed, and ridiculed, argued back. They had left him with no choice. They had forced his hand. Desperation, coupled with a deep-seated desire for accountability, began to chip away at his ethical boundaries. The meticulous engineer, who once only designed systems, now saw a chance to spectacularly redesign a system of justice. Even if it meant getting his hands dirty, he would make them see the water they refused to acknowledge. The crack in the basement foundation wasn't just a physical fissure. It was a psychological chasm, separating the old, law-abiding Alex Chen from the one who now existed. He taped the HOA Gala invitation to his whiteboard, next to a printed-out satellite image of Willow Creek, focusing on the country club and its surrounding terrain. The initial idea, born of pure, furious desperation, began to crystallize into a cold, calculated strategy. The country club, an old, sprawling property, sat at the lowest elevation of Willow Creek, a natural basin. Its magnificent golf course, with its lush greens and artificial water features, was a complex network of drains, culverts, and underground pipes designed to manage runoff from the higher residential areas. It was, ironically, a perfect, albeit unwitting, target for a redirected flow. This wasn't about petty vandalism. It was about exposing a systemic failure where it would hurt the most: their pride, their prestige, their pockets. The gala, the HOA's annual coronation, was the stage. His first step was meticulous reconnaissance, a skill honed by years of debugging complex systems. He spent evenings driving slowly around the country club's perimeter, observing the subtle dips and rises of the landscape, the placement of storm drains, and the flow of water during a light drizzle. He downloaded publicly available topographical maps of Willow Creek, cross-referencing them with older property development plans he found deep within the county's online archives. He discovered that a major, but largely forgotten, overflow culvert, designed to divert excess water from the residential storm drains into a less-used section of the golf course, was located dangerously close to the country club's main event hall, the very hall hosting the gala. This culvert, overgrown with weeds and partially obstructed, rarely carried significant volume because the HOA had neglected to clear the blockages further upstream that would direct water into it. If he could clear those blockages, and perhaps even redirect other flows, this culvert could become a powerful channel. The how began to form. It wasn't about causing a biblical flood, but a strategic, localized inundation. He wouldn't breach a dam. He would simply guide the existing, mismanaged water where it needed to go to make a point. The plan involved two main phases. Phase 1, the diversion. He needed to identify the key choke points in the existing storm drain network that usually bypassed the overflow culvert, forcing water away from the country club. These were primarily grates clogged with leaves, sediment, and small branches, typical HOA neglect. By systematically clearing or subtly altering these choke points, he could encourage water to flow into the neglected overflow culvert. Phase 2. The gateway. The culvert itself would need clearing, not just of debris, but of any significant obstructions that might impede a large flow. Most crucially, he identified a less-used access point to the culvert near the back of the country club grounds, disguised by thick bushes. This would be his entry point. He wouldn't need heavy machinery. Just a few basic tools: a heavy-duty raking hook for clearing grates, a durable collapsible shovel, and a set of waders. The gala was less than 3 weeks away, a ticking clock that sharpened his focus. Alex began his covert operations under the cloak of night. His first few excursions were about stealth and observation. Dressed in dark clothing, moving like a ghost through the suburban shadows, he'd walk the dog late at night, but his eyes were scanning drainage points. He bought a powerful, compact headlamp and a pair of water-resistant gloves. His car, usually pristine, now housed a collection of suspiciously muddy tools. The mental gymnastics of his daily life were exhausting. Project meetings by day, reconnaissance missions by night. His first practical step was clearing the upstream grates. This was tedious, dirty work. Under the cover of new moon nights, he'd park his car a few blocks away, walk to the target drain, and meticulously clear the accumulated debris. The sounds of distant traffic, the occasional bark of a dog, every rustle of leaves made his heart pound. One night, as he was expertly pulling a stubborn clump of roots from a culvert opening, a patrol car slowly cruised by. Alex froze, dropping to a crouch behind a large oak tree, holding his breath, the muddy rake clutched tight. The patrol car paused briefly, its spotlight sweeping the quiet street before moving on. He didn't move for another 5 minutes, his pulse hammering. That was a close call, a stark reminder of the legal precariousness of his mission. He had to be smarter, quicker. His focus then shifted to the primary overflow culvert near the country club. This required more boldness. He scouted the area during the day, noting security cameras few and poorly positioned, thankfully, and potential blind spots. His preferred access point, shrouded by dense shrubbery, offered decent concealment. One cool, foggy evening, equipped with his waders, shovel, and a heavy-duty hook, he slipped onto the country club grounds. The air was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and something vaguely floral from the clubhouse. He found the culvert access panel, surprisingly unlocked and rusted. Inside, it was dark, damp, and smelled of stagnant water and earth. He worked methodically, shoveling out compacted mud, dislodging jammed branches, and clearing years of neglect. He worked for hours, stopping only when he heard a golf cart in the distance or the faint murmur of voices from the clubhouse. He was exhausted, muddy, and exhilarated. He wasn't just digging dirt, he was digging his way to justice. Each shovelful of mud was a small act of defiance against Richard Sterling's dismissive smirk, against Brenda Maxwell's boilerplate emails. The days leading up to the gala were a blur of work, tension, and a growing sense of grim satisfaction. He'd done his part, the pathways were clear. The stage was set. He'd even subtly adjusted a few downspouts on communal buildings that pointed away from the target drainage, nudging more water towards his intended flow. He had become a master of water redirection, a quiet architect of liquid retribution. The only remaining variable was the weather. He had checked the long-range forecast religiously. A significant storm was predicted for the night of the gala. Perfect fate, it seemed, was on his side. Or perhaps it was simply recognizing the gravity of the HOA's negligence. He felt a potent mix of nerves and anticipation. The plan was meticulous, daring, and deeply personal. He would make them acknowledge the water. He would make them drown in their own indifference. The Willow Creek Country Club's grand ballroom shimmered under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, a testament to the HOA's perceived success and the annual pinnacle of their self-congratulatory existence. Tonight was the annual gala, an evening of carefully curated elegance and ostentatious displays of community spirit. Tables draped in pristine white linen groaned under the weight of gourmet delicacies. A jazz trio played smooth, unobtrusive melodies, and the air hummed with the polite murmur of conversation and the clinking of expensive glassware. Richard Sterling, resplendent in a tailored tuxedo, stood on a small dais, a microphone in hand, delivering a speech filled with platitudes about community harmony and responsible governance, his voice oozing with a smug satisfaction that grated on Alex Chen's nerves. Brenda Maxwell, in a shimmering sapphire gown, circulated among the guests, her smile fixed, her eyes scanning for any perceived social misstep. The room was a sea of designer dresses and sharp suits, a tableau of oblivious affluence, utterly disconnected from the rising dampness that plagued the lower elevations of their very own community. Alex, disguised in a rental tuxedo and a carefully cultivated air of detached observation, moved discreetly through the fringes of the crowd. He wasn't a guest, not truly. He was an observer, a silent, vengeful specter in their midst, his heart a drumbeat against his ribs. Every laugh, every clink of a glass, every empty word from Sterling's speech fueled the cold fire in his gut. He had chosen to be inside, to witness their downfall firsthand, to see the precise moment their carefully constructed facade shattered. His internal tension was a coiled spring, wound tighter with each passing minute. He'd spent the last few hours before the gala setting the final pieces into place. The last, crucial culvert grate, strategically positioned near the country club's service entrance, had been subtly loosened, its anchors filed down, just enough to give way under sufficient pressure. He had also, with a borrowed, high-powered pump, begun to slowly divert water from a large, neglected retention pond on the far side of the golf course, a pond whose overflow usually fed into a different, more distant drainage system. Tonight, that overflow was being gently, inexorably, nudged towards his prepared channels, towards the very culvert that led directly to the ballroom's foundation. The forecast had held true. A steady, persistent rain had begun an hour before the gala, a soft, almost polite drizzle that was now intensifying, perfectly feeding his meticulously crafted system. As Sterling launched into a particularly verbose anecdote about the HOA's fiscal prudence, Alex slipped out a side door, unnoticed. The air outside was cool and heavy, thick with the scent of wet earth and impending storm. The rain was picking up, drumming a rhythmic crescendo on the tiled roof. He moved swiftly, silently, towards the service entrance, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He located the culvert grate, now almost entirely submerged by the rising water. This was it. This was the trigger. He pulled a small, custom-made lever from his inner jacket pocket, a simple, yet ingenious device designed to exert precise pressure. With a deep breath, he inserted the lever into a small gap he had created earlier. Bracing himself, he pushed down, slowly at first, then with a surge of adrenaline-fueled force. There was a low, grinding groan, a sound almost swallowed by the increasing rain, as the weakened anchors finally gave way. The heavy metal grate, dislodged, slid just enough to create a gaping maw, a dark, hungry mouth ready to swallow the torrent. Water, previously held back, surged forward with a sudden, guttural roar, a powerful, dark current rushing into the newly opened pathway. He watched for a moment, a grim satisfaction spreading through him, before quickly replacing the lever in his pocket and melting back into the shadows, circling around to the main entrance, his tuxedo now slightly damp but his resolve ironclad. Back inside, the jazz music played on, oblivious, but then, a subtle shift. A few guests near the grand entrance paused, their conversations faltering. A faint, trickling sound, like a leaky faucet, began to penetrate the polite hum. Someone chuckled. Sounds like the plumbing's acting up again, but the trickle grew, quickly becoming a distinct gurgle, then a slosh. A woman in a shimmering gown gasped as a dark line appeared under the main doors, spreading rapidly across the polished marble. It was a thin, dark tendril at first, snaking its way towards the center of the room. Then, with a sudden, terrifying surge, the water burst through the doors, not a trickle, but a wave, a muddy, angry tide that swept into the ballroom. Chaos erupted, a collective gasp, then screams. The jazz music faltered, then died, the elegant atmosphere shattered into a cacophony of panicked shouts and the sickening slosh of water. Guests shrieked, their faces contorting in disbelief and horror as the water rapidly rose, soaking expensive shoes, ruining designer dresses, and turning the pristine floor into a treacherous, reflective pond. Canapes floated away, champagne, flutes toppled, and the carefully arranged floral centerpieces became soggy, pathetic islands. Richard Sterling, mid-sentence in his speech, watched his audience descend into pandemonium, his face a mask of utter bewilderment, then outrage, as the water reached the dais, splashing his polished shoes. Brenda Maxwell, her sapphire gown now clinging to her legs, stumbled as she tried to navigate the rising tide, her fixed smile replaced by a horrified grimace. People slipped, fell, and scrambled onto chairs and tables, their dignity dissolving faster than the sugar sculptures on the dessert bar, the air filled with the stench of damp earth and the frantic cries of the trapped. It was a deluge, a swirling, muddy vortex of retribution. Alex stood near a large potted palm, a silent observer amidst the pandemonium. He watched Sterling's face, saw the dawning horror, the realization that this wasn't just a burst pipe, but something far more deliberate, far more devastating. A wave of profound satisfaction washed over him, a potent, almost dizzying sense of vindication. This was it. This was the consequence. They couldn't ignore this. They couldn't dismiss this as an unusually wet season. This was the water they had refused to see, now brought directly to their feet. Yet, beneath the triumph, A cold tendril of fear snaked through him. What now? The sheer scale of the chaos was exhilarating, but also terrifying. He had done it. The plan, audacious and reckless, had worked, but the aftermath, the reckoning, was yet to come. He felt a strange, detached calm, like a programmer watching a complex algorithm execute perfectly, even as the system it controlled spiraled into beautiful, destructive chaos. The aftermath of the Willow Creek Annual Gala was a scene of sodden devastation. The grand ballroom, once a beacon of HOA pride, was now a swamp of ruined finery, splintered furniture, and a pervasive, earthy stench. Emergency services, initially responding to panic calls of a burst pipe, quickly realized the scale of the deliberate redirection. Firefighters pumped out thousands of gallons of muddy water, while police officers, grim-faced, began an immediate investigation. The HOA leadership, particularly Richard Sterling and Brenda Maxwell, were apoplectic. Their faces, once smug, were now contorted with a mixture of outrage and profound humiliation. Sterling, his tuxedo still damp and stained, bellowed orders into his phone, demanding swift justice, while Maxwell, shivering despite the mild night, muttered about sabotage and domestic terrorism. The initial theory was a massive, unforeseen pipe burst, but the sheer volume and trajectory of the water, coupled with the suspicious dislodged culvert grate, quickly pointed to something far more sinister and intentional. Alex, having slipped away from the chaotic scene, watched the news reports from his living room, a strange mix of triumph and trepidation churning within him. He saw the aerial shots of the country club, the ruined ballroom, the grim faces of the HOA. He saw Sterling's furious press conference, promising to find the culprits and prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law. The local news channels were abuzz, speculating wildly about disgruntled employees, rival communities, or even an elaborate prank gone horribly wrong. For a brief, intoxicating moment, Alex felt untouchable, a phantom of justice, but the illusion was fleeting. He knew it was only a matter of time. The police, methodical and relentless, would trace the water flow, examine the altered drainage, and eventually, their investigation would lead back to the source. To him, the reveal came not from a dramatic confession, but from his own meticulous nature. Alex had been careful, but not perfect. A small, distinctive tool, a specialized wrench he'd used to loosen a specific grate, had slipped from his pocket during the deluge and was found by an investigating officer near the culvert access point. It had his initials, subtly engraved, a gift from his father years ago. The police also found traces of a unique soil composition on his tires and boots, matching the sediment from the newly cleared culvert. Within 48 hours, two detectives were at his door. Alex, seeing their grim faces through his peephole, knew the game was up. He opened the door, his heart heavy but his resolve unbroken. He didn't confess immediately, but he didn't deny it either. He simply laid out his evidence, the months of ignored warnings, the detailed reports, the pictures of his increasingly damaged home. He spoke calmly, logically, recounting the HOA's dismissiveness, their arrogance, their utter failure to protect the community. He framed it not as an act of malice, but an act of last resort, a desperate plea for attention from a system that had deafened itself to reason. The community's reaction was a tempest of divided opinions. On local social media groups, the debate raged. Some residents were outraged, condemning Alex as a dangerous vigilante who had jeopardized public safety and caused immense damage. He should be locked up. One comment screamed, "This is anarchy." But a surprising number of others, many of whom had quietly suffered their own minor grievances with the HOA, began to voice their support, albeit cautiously. He warned them. One post read, "We all saw the water. Maybe they deserved it." Anonymous messages of solidarity, even small donations to a nascent legal fund, started appearing in his inbox. The initial shock gave way to a deeper conversation about the HOA's accountability, their perceived elitism, and their history of ignoring resident concerns. The flood had literally brought their failures to the surface. The legal and personal consequences for Alex were immediate and severe. He was arrested, charged with felony vandalism, reckless endangerment, and destruction of property. Bail was set high. His job, though understanding, placed him on indefinite leave. The media, sensing a juicy story, descended upon Willow Creek, portraying him as either a madman or a folk hero. His life, once meticulously ordered, became a maelstrom of legal consultations, public scrutiny, and the crushing weight of uncertainty. The legal battle was grueling, expensive, and emotionally draining. He faced the very real prospect of a long prison sentence. Yet, even in the darkest moments, a flicker of something akin to peace remained. He had made them listen. The HOA, reeling from the public relations nightmare and facing potential lawsuits from furious gala attendees, was finally forced into a reckoning. The flood, a literal and metaphorical stain on their pristine image, forced their hand. An independent investigation, initiated by the county, confirmed Alex's long-standing warnings about the inadequate drainage system. The report was damning, highlighting years of deferred maintenance and a shocking lack of foresight. Richard Sterling, facing a vote of no confidence and immense public pressure, resigned in disgrace. Brenda Maxwell followed suit. A new interim board was appointed, composed of younger, more community-minded residents, some of whom had quietly supported Alex. They issued a public apology, acknowledging past failures, and immediately allocated emergency funds for a comprehensive overhaul of the community's drainage infrastructure. Construction began within weeks, a visible testament to the change. Months later, awaiting his sentencing, Alex reflected on his actions. Was it worth it? The question echoed in the quiet confines of his legal limbo. He had lost his job, faced public condemnation, and stood on the precipice of a criminal record. But the community, his community, was finally safe from the flood waters. The HOA, once an unyielding monolith of indifference, had been forced to change. He had, through extreme means, achieved what countless polite emails and desperate pleas could not. The lesson was stark. Sometimes, to be heard, you had to make an undeniable splash. Justice, he realized, wasn't always a neat, orderly process. Sometimes, it was messy, chaotic, and required a willingness to stand alone against the tide, even if it meant getting swept up in the consequences. He had chosen defiance, and in doing so, he had forced a reckoning. The water had been redirected, not just to a gala, but to the very heart of a complacent system, washing away the illusion of control and leaving behind a clearer, albeit muddier, path forward.